Here we go with episode 36 of this extraordinary book, Cosmic I Ching. We've got a really super interesting hexagram for you guys today. 36, the darkening of the light. Ooh, what's going on here? Well, we have fire over the lake and the judgment, darkening of the light. In adversity, it furthers one to hold fast to what is correct. This hexagram shows the ego fighting to regain control after its advice has caused a person to fail to meet an adversity. In this effort to reassert itself, the ego replays the same old doubts and re-inspires the same old fears that were installed in the person during childhood to remind him why he needs the ego. It then plays its trump card, guilt, which makes him feel guilty if he abandons it. Among the basic rationales used to install the ego are those about his nature, that it is insufficient to cope with life, and that it contains flaws that must be overcome through developing the collective ego's program of virtues. These rationales are reinforced with threats that a person will be rejected by his family, society, etc., and lose the protection without which he will not be able to survive. Added is the fear of becoming guilty of betraying his family, culture, or forefathers if he follows his inner truth. The ego calls it selfish to follow one's inner truth and arrogant to question the collective ego's taboos and accepted beliefs. It's not. If the person will stand back, even for a moment, and listen to this monologue as a bystander, he will recognize it as the ego's game and thereby gain the distance he needs to separate out what belongs to the ego and what belongs to him. This separation is the moment in which he can break the deception fostered by the ego that it and he are one and the same. This is to get to the heart of the darkening, as it is put in line 4, and is the moment in which he can begin to liberate himself from the ego's dominance. This separation can be observed in meditation, especially when it is under the guidance of the sage and sometimes in dreams. To liberate himself from the ego, it is necessary for him to say the inner no to all its aspects. This hexagram could concern a person who, on seeing one or more aspects of the ego, is either unwilling or unable to say the inner no. The person who is unwilling has fallen under what he perceives as the charming aspect of the ego, and therefore will say, I like my ego. He believes it adds quality, excitement, and interest to his life. Upon perceiving its mischievous qualities, he thinks they will not cause him harm and may even be of benefit to him. This charming aspect of the ego has made him its captive and has blinded him to the ego's destructiveness, which has both darkened his inner light and imprisoned his true self. This charming aspect of the ego often employs a humor that denigrates others and puts the person up at others' expense. The person may also be fascinated by the magician aspect of the ego and its cleverness in pulling solutions out of its sleeve, which are beguiling both to himself and others. It is this magician aspect that invents the sleight of hand of logic that we had mentioned in part 1 and in several hexagrams, by which it diverts the blame for the harm it does, either to the true self, to others, to nature, or to the cosmos. It is also the aspect that reinvents history to monumentalize human achievements due to their use of power and invents myths of human greatness that eclipse the existence of the helpers of the invisible world. Darkening of the light is also a metaphor for a person's state of mind who is caught in the demonic sphere of consciousness or logic of the ego. While he is within this web, he can only imagine that things are brought about through changes created by effort and striving. He believes the harder he strives, the more successful he will be. However, in this circumstance, he has exhausted all effort and all strategies. He finally sees that no amount of effort can extricate him from the difficulty. Caught in this mindset, he is blind to recognizing that in the cosmic reality, changes are brought about by the helpers through transformations in the atomic realm. Moreover, he denies all the experiences he has had of these transformations, through falsely dismissing them as due to his imagination, chance, luck, or intervention by something supernatural, rather than to the entirely natural way the cosmos helps all of those parts which hold firmly to it. The solution is indicated by the judgment. Hold fast to what is correct. Hold fast to what is correct. This means saying the inner no to the despairing ego with all its dark seeing, which is bent only on keeping itself in place. The ego would resist the real solution simply because it would be displaced and discredited. The value of the adversity the person finds himself in is that it gives him the opportunity to see with absolute clarity that the ego is his only real enemy. It is the ego which, at the depth of despair, would even have the person give up his life, as in suicide, rather than give up its pretenses and the mistaken images and ideas. Mistaken images and ideas, mistaken, to which it owes its existence. Darkening can refer to a person who is trying to resolve a problem with the I Ching, but despairs that he's getting nowhere. He even suspects that the cosmos is against him and is tempted to give up his path. His inner light is threatened through looking at the situation from the standpoint of the ego. It is as if the person has on dark glasses and everything he sees is sorted out under the headings of no better and worse. Also, other people's habits of mind seem so defective that he cannot imagine any possibility of their changing. Darkening can also refer to an outer situation in which it would be dangerous or unwise to display one's clarity of vision or to say the truth. The person who is in touch with his clarity and common sense holds to what is correct by saying the inner no and by refusing to become involved in the external circumstance. He then asks for help from the helpers to take care of the situation and turns the matter over to them. This contrasts with the solution offered by the collective ego, which would counsel the valiant defender of the truth to come forward to say what he thinks needs to be said, regardless of the circumstances. Such a person labors under the belief that in order to serve the truth, he must not hide his light under a bushel. Darkening can also refer to an inner condition in which the person is threatened with images that give rise to hopelessness and despair because he feels that his life has no way to blossom and be fulfilled. He needs to ask himself what beliefs hold him in this inner prison against his common sense. He has failed to notice that the key is in the lock and he only needs to turn it to leave. This key is to say the inner no to the ego's self-pitying phrases and its dismal picture of reality. If he will look away from his miseries, he will see the daily blessings that exist in the small things of his life, the sun, the birds, the trees, kind people all around him. From this benchmark of goodness and blessing, his appreciation for the small things can grow to fill him from within, rather than giving his inner space over to negativity. Don't give your inner space over to negativity. That's a choice. Darkening can also refer to a situation in which a person represses his own needs to fulfill another's. Doing so causes him a constant loss of his life energy. All relationships need to be reciprocal in terms of an exchange of chi energy. This exchange occurs when there's mutual respect and sensitivity. The question here is what beliefs the person allows within himself that prohibit him from respecting and honoring his own needs in favor of others, or what inner terrors prevent him from saying the inner no to insensitivity and disrespect on the part of others. This person needs to say the inner no to all behaviors in his relationships which lack equality and reciprocity, and to refuse to participate in them. He may need to ask the sage via the RTCM if he has an inner block to saying the inner no, and if so, to correct this problem. Darkening can also refer to an ongoing or chronic codependency that locks everyone involved into destructive and energy-robbing experiences. Codependency describes a person who lifeguards another with his inner eye. The other, feeling protected by this inner watching, feels a false safety in doing dangerous things, having an inner assurance that if something bad happens, the other will save him, or it will be the other's fault. Such inner lifeguarding locks the common sense of the one being lifeguarded in a spell. The person supervising is under a complementary spell of believing he must lifeguard the other. Both people need to be freed from the spells. The one exposing himself to dangers will then be able to recognize that he is on his own and will then listen to his common sense. Removal of the spells also releases the destructive effects of the person's disbelief in his ability to protect himself. Letting go is accomplished more easily by turning the matter of the other's safety over to the cosmos and asking for its help, as this is the only real source of safety. If the person has difficulty saying this inner no, it may be due to the prospect of becoming guilty for whatever awful thing might happen to the other. In such a person's mind, guilt and responsibility are intermingled. He needs to recognize that both the responsibility and the guilt are false concepts that have been put upon him from without. Every person has senses that inform him when he is endangered and that make him respond to the situation in exactly the right way. The person needs to rid himself of the spells of false responsibility and guilt. This frees the helpers for both people. Line 1, darkening of the light during flight. He lowers his wings. In his depression, he does not eat for 3 days on his wanderings, but he has somewhere to go. The host has occasion to talk. Darkening during flight refers to a person who, after beginning to resolve his problems with the help of the sage, is disappointed because he has not achieved visible progress. On deciding that the helpers do not exist and that he is left alone with his problems, he falls into depression and hopelessness, the meaning of lowering his wings. He has been looking at the situation through the eyes of the ego, which says, see where this has led you, and this path doesn't work. Not eating for 3 days while wandering refers to his inner wandering, not knowing what to do, thus depriving himself of the nourishment that would come to him from the helpers if he said the inner no to hopelessness and helplessness. However, having somewhere to go indicates that he has an inner feeling that he was on the correct path. The host has occasion to talk points to a reversal of places between the ego and his true self. While in truth, the true self is the host and the ego, the parasite that feeds on its host, the ego here has taken the place of the leader of the personality and talks to the true self as if it were a child and guilty for what has happened. It gives its 1,000 reasons why the person should put the ego back in charge. Its 1,000 reasons create a ball of conflict, which is not soluble by thinking about those reasons. It is necessary to cease listening to the ego altogether and call on the helper of dissolution to dissolve the whole ball of conflict. The reason for the lack of progress is the person's having allowed the ego to watch for progress, which not only blocks the helpers, but also creates a fate. To remedy the situation, he needs to recognize that his judging the cosmos is arrogant, and that on this account, he has created obstructions. The origin of his arrogance is the human-centered view of the universe that he's adopted from the collective ego. He needs to review the ego elements in his attitude and say the inner no to them and return to the inner path on which he had embarked. Line 2, darkening injures him in the left thigh. He gives aid with the strength of a horse, success. Darkening, with reference to the left thigh, indicates a spell that a person has put on himself through becoming attached in a dependent way to the sage, whom he looks up to as all-powerful. He thinks that if he gets the sage on his good side, everything will be good for him. By making the sage into God or godlike figure, he has decreased his own dignity and self-worth. The sage recognizes his error and comes to his aid with the strength of a horse to make him aware of his faulty attitude. Dependence on the sage to help him access his inner truth is not a mistake, but the kind of attachment by which a person turns responsibility over to the sage for every decision is incorrect because it slanders his common sense. This line also addresses situations in which a person seeks to buy his way out of a fate by making a deal to serve the sage, to end a fate. Such efforts, however, only cause the sage to withdraw, making the person feel intensely alone and abandoned, hence the darkening. He needs to understand, 1, that the sage does not make deals, and 2, that he can only end his fate by recognizing the mistaken ideas and beliefs that have caused it, and then ridding himself of them. Doing so will activate the helper of transformation to end his fate. The idea of making deals comes from the ego and is a throwaway of his dignity. Part of correcting himself is to realize that he's never meant to throw his dignity away for any purpose. Despite these errors, the sage has come to his aid voluntarily to help him realize his mistaken view and to give him an opportunity to correct it. Darkening of a person's will to continue at the I Ching occurs when he is expected to resolve his difficulties in one great sweep of effort. Behind his expectation is belief that if he works hard enough, he will win the sympathy of the cosmos to come to his aid. The Cosmos, however, is neither to be won nor bought. Darkening also occurs when a person approaches the sage only to resolve his difficulties in order to return to his ordinary life. He is not interested in making the necessary effort to free his true self. Under normal conditions, the sage would retreat, but because the person remembers the gifts he has received from the sage in the past, the sage comes to his aid to help him resolve his difficulties. This line also addresses the darkening that occurs when a person begins to believe that he is never going to have the love relationship that will fulfill him. Love is a cosmic gift that flows from the cosmos through the two lovers and back again to the cosmos. When a person thinks that love comes from the other person and is something that he can possess, he makes it difficult for the cosmos to give the gift. Even if he should receive the gift of love, but in receiving it has the wrong attitude towards it, as in turning it to egotistical purposes, the gift is taken away. Nevertheless, the cosmos does give the gift, but to those who within themselves are ready for it, both to those who within themselves are ready for it and to others as a cosmic intervention in their lives to bring about their inner growth. If a person frees himself of expectation and his mistaken ideas about love, the cosmos will restore the gift of love to him. The traditional interpretation of this line says that it is a person's duty to fight with all his strength to save others in danger, implying regardless of the circumstances. While the cosmos can indeed use a person to help another who is involved in a fate, it is the cosmos that saves him in the end. The person can only assist as directed by his common sense. If he has taken upon himself the duty to intervene in others' fates by adopting the magnificent self-image of the hero who rescues others, he will have created a fate for himself because his actions will have interfered in the cosmic purpose that fate is meant to serve. To end his fate, he needs to rid himself of the self-image mentioned. In another case, a person may have taken on the self-image of the one who, after having himself crossed the great water, now has the job of hauling the others across. He gives help with the strength of a horse as a reference to the helper of cosmic intervention that comes to help when a person has regained his natural modesty. Line 3, darkening of the light during the hunt in the south. The great leader is captured. One must not expect perseverance too soon. Here, the hunt is for the ringleader of disorder, the source of his depressed feelings. During the hunt, under the guidance of the sage, a person finds out that the ringleader is the ego, in the form of all of the mistaken ideas and beliefs he has adopted into his inner program. These ideas and beliefs are the cause of the betrayal of his true self and his subsequent embarrassment. The ringleader is not, as he had thought, some evil force outside himself or a person he has been blaming for betraying him. The inner verbalizations of the ego reveal its magician aspect in phrases that lead to the darkening of a person's inner light, hiding of cosmic truth, the undermining of his will, and the usurpation of his chi energy. The embarrassing and depressing feelings he is now experiencing come from the ego, upon its being seen as the source of his wrong moves, and upon its being recognized as his true enemy. The ego plays upon these feelings of embarrassment in order to transfer all the blame either back onto the true self or onto others. By understanding this dynamic and by recognizing that the ego is a parasite in his psyche, he can free himself of its evil influence by firmly saying the inner no to its activity of putting the blame onto himself or others. In doing this, he captures the ringleader of disorder. One must not expect perseverance too soon is warning him of a particular dynamic of the ego which it employs to reinstate itself. The ego will attempt to seize his anger at having been betrayed by it by turning his attention to his losses, the flattering self-images he has lost and the privileges that have accompanied them. By causing him to dwell on his losses through introducing the ego emotion of self-pity, the ego escapes being the element blamed and thereby resumes control. Its next words are, you must do something to recover your losses to enjoy life again. The ego then turns the initial anger that was directed against it into uncontrolled vindictiveness, restlessness, fury, desire, hope, and despair that are directed both back at the true self and outward to life circumstances or other people. This line can also point to an interference by the ego that sabotages the help received from the helpers Aswan inserts the thought that the success was a supernatural event coming from above, or that it was magical. An example is an illness which occurs after having been healed. Thinking of the help as supernatural is credited the wrong source, hence undoes what was accomplished. The help given by the helpers is neither supernatural nor magical, but the natural and everyday way the cosmos acts to benefit what is in harmony with it. Darkening of the light during the hunt in the south can also indicate that a person has been looking for the cause of a problem where it is not to be found. The south represents the side of the mountain lit by the sun. The sun here points to what we see in terms of appearances, which is the cause of the darkening. The only way the inner truth can be discovered is by searching for the untruths that cover it up. This means going into the dark places of the psyche where the untruth hides. Another trick of the ego is to present the search for the truth as a secret held by the few and as difficult, needing an experienced human leader. The person who believes this misses the point, since such ideas are invariably promoted by people who pose as possessors of the truth in order to gain power over others. They flatter their followers into thinking that by gaining access to the truth they possess, they will share in this power. Woo! Line 4, he penetrates the left side of the belly. One gets at the very heart of the darkening of the light and leaves the gate and courtyard. Penetrating the left side of the belly and getting to the very heart of the darkening of the light is a way of saying that a person needs to come to a deeper understanding of the source of his problem. On doing so, he will find that his heart has not been in the right place because he's been acting from thinking rather than from feeling. The ego, as the source of the darkening, has been ruling his personality and his relationships by making him believe that thinking is superior to feeling. It can also be that the ego has been dominating through fantasies that arouse ego emotions, which the person has then mistaken for his true feelings. The courtyard here is a metaphor for the fantasy world, the parallel reality that is based on the values of the collective ego. This line points to two of these values in particular, which it glorifies: the accumulation of abstract knowledge and the increase of fantasies created by the imaging mind, promoted, among others, by the fantasy creators of the media. Isn't that right? Oh my God. The mainstream media is pure fantasy. It's absolutely pure fantasy. None of it is real. This devotion to knowledge and fantasy is opposed to the knowledge and feeling of the heart that are gained through experience. And you know, more and more people every day are seeing through the fake mainstream media. CNN, they're all fake. It's fake. Don't listen to it. Don't listen to it. Being abstract content of the forebrain, this content is indifferent to true feeling. Following either the path of abstract knowledge or the path of fantasy leads to dead ends, in that their goals, when reached, fail to satisfy the most basic human needs. Knowledge of the heart is the light that is darkened by abstract thinking and fantasizing. Moreover, this activity of the forebrain is the generator of all ego emotions, which are mistaken for true feelings. This line can also refer to the darkening that occurs in a love relationship when the two individuals want to see themselves as one. Such an idea draws them into sacrificing the uniqueness of their true natures to an abstract image of what they ought to be. This sacrifice of their true selves creates an inner conflict within each person, which in the end is insupportable, so that it undermines the relationship. Unchecked, it will destroy both individuals. Saying the inner no to sacrificing oneself to such an idea is to leave through the gate. The line can also refer to other instances in which the individual merges his identity into a group or organizational hierarchy. Such an adoption of the group we betrays the uniqueness and independence of his true nature and prevents it from coming to expression. Line 5, darkening of the light as with Prince Chi, being firm and correct furthers. Prince Chi is an historical figure who lived at the court of a tyrant. If you're familiar with the I Ching, you probably heard this story. The explanation is given that he was a relative of the tyrant and therefore could not withdraw from the court, even though he was repulsed by the behavior of the tyrant. To avoid betraying his convictions, he feigned insanity. Prince Chi is a metaphor for several kinds of situations. One shows a person in a difficult circumstance that he cannot leave outwardly. He needs to hide his light or even tell an untruth to conceal his real feelings because the others are unable to understand his viewpoint. Further, they would use it against him. The metaphor can also refer to unintentionally misinforming a person, to intentionally misinforming a person because that person is encroaching in an attempt to know things he has no right to know. This is firm and correct conduct in the face of an encroaching ego. In another instance, a person may be withholding his natural inclination to say a heartfelt "I love you" from an intuition that the ego of the one he loves is waiting to grab this statement and possess him. He needs to say the inner no to the ego and its desire to possess. He also needs to search out the deeper fears and doubts in his partner that cause him to want to control the love relationship. The line also points to a person's inner and outer sovereignty having been damaged by slanders coming from without. Outwardly, he is unable to dismiss the slanders. If he says the inner no to them and turns them over to the sage, he can regain his inner sovereignty. Once he has regained that, cosmic helpers are engaged to correct the outer situation. The outer follows the inner. Such slanders can stick to him and affect him only as long as he remains attached to them, or as long as he allows them to affect him. An example of a slanderous phrase is, "Who are you to judge?" Or "You do not have the expertise, knowledge, authority to know what is correct or what to do." This situation needs to be treated as a spell. This line can also refer to remarks made that have caused a person to doubt the validity of his true feelings. The remarks have put a spell on his feelings, preventing him from feeling them. He needs to recognize the phrases that have created the spell and rid himself of them. An example is the phrase, "You can't trust your feelings." Prince Shi can also be a metaphor for a person who has the noble self-image that he can bear with an incorrect situation forever, if necessary, or he may harbor the incorrect idea that suffering is noble. By failing to say the inner no to such an idea and to the incorrect situation from which he also needs to withdraw, he has given it his permission to continue, thus create a fate for himself. Line 6, "No light but darkness. First he climbed up to heaven, then he plunged into the depths of the earth." No light but darkness describes the way that ego/collective ego converts cosmic consciousness into demonic consciousness by reversing meanings. For example, when the individual seeks to fulfill his true needs and develop his uniqueness, the ego calls his behavior selfish and undermining the social order. Just the opposite is true. It is the ego and its parent, the collective ego, which undermine the natural order of society and the cosmic order. It is through the expression of an individual's uniqueness that the creative gifts of the cosmos are brought to the world. No light but darkness also refers to the way the collective ego, if allowed by humans to become completely dominating, destroys the individual's life energy because this is its only source of energy. This line at the top of the Darkening is the one place in the I Ching where the individual ego and the collective ego are shown in their essence as all dark, no light. Also describes the deeds of utter destruction throughout the ages that were performed against individuals and species. Among these are the Great Inquisitions, the massacres of tribal cultures, and today's practices of keeping people alive beyond their time. It is the function of fate to end such darkening. Fate also extinguishes the cosmic blame incurred by the ringleaders who are responsible for these deeds. It would be incorrect to accept any feeling of collective guilt for what other people did. First he climbed up to heaven, then he plunged into the depths of the earth, describes the rise and fall of the monumentalized ego. The rise to heaven pictures the imagination of the person, in which he sees himself attaining fame and glory, or as having become immune to the law of fate. It is precisely when a person has allowed this back of the mind ego thought that his fall to earth begins. The fall to earth is the shock that reawakens his senses, brings him back to humility, to recognize his grounding to the earth, and to enable him to correct himself. Thus the expression in the judgment of Hexagram 51, shock, following such a fall. Oh, ha, ha. The ha, ha, it might seem, is vindictive, but it expresses the deep feeling of relief that comes when a tyrant has been brought low. the line confirms that cosmic justice supersedes the laws erected by the collective ego. A person may also receive this line to make him aware of the ultimate consequences of giving the ego safe harbor. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Cosmic justice supersedes any laws of anything. And we're seeing that right now. We're seeing the fall of a lot of the collective ego structures and situations and governments in the world. You know, that's all controlled by the collective ego. We're seeing that happen right now. And yes, it's no light but darkness. You know, these things, these people. The ego, it has no light, none. You know, and as long as you try, if you think that you can give the ego safe harbor, you know, you're mistaken. You're just simply mistaken. There is nothing that can stop what is coming. Cosmic justice prevails. Yes. All right, guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you again in the next one.